Welcome to The Pulse, brought to you by United Regional Healthcare System. I'm Henry Florsheim, President and CEO of the Wichita Falls Chamber of Commerce. We are streaming live on Facebook and YouTube, and will be rebroadcast on KJTL Texoma's Fox on Sunday. My guest today, Wichita Falls City Manager Darron Leiker.
Hey, Henry.
Hey, Darron, thanks for joining me today. Give me your elevator pitch. Who is Darron Leiker?
All right, I'm going to start off with a good one. Well, let me go way back. I'm from Kansas. I'm from Central Kansas, born and raised there. So all my family is still in Kansas. Grew up in a rural community. Went to college in Kansas. Went to undergraduate school at Washburn University in Topeka, Kansas, and then went to graduate school and received my master's degree in public administration at Wichita State University in Wichita, Kansas. After that, I did an internship with Sedgwick County with the manager's office there, and that's the large county that Wichita sits in, so a county of about 500,000 people. Did that for about a year, and then went to Salina, Kansas, and became a management analyst and then an assistant to the city manager. I did that for about 3.5 years and got the itch to be city manager. So I wanted to take my turn in the barrel, so to speak. So I competed for the job in Sterling, Kansas, and got it. And I was 28 or 29 years old, bright-eyed. So I did that for about 4 years and wanted to go to a larger community. You know, in city management, there's only one job in the town, and so when you want to promote or go to a larger city, you have to move, obviously. So I applied for the assistant city manager job here in Wichita Falls and got that. And as part of that job, I was over aviation, traffic, and transportation, and then assisted quite a bit with the budget process here. Did that for about 3.5 years, and then my predecessor, Jim Berzina, retired, and so I competed for that job. The city did a national search, and I came out on top of that search. And so at the age of 35, I was, I think, the youngest city manager in Wichita Falls, and I've been in that position ever since, for about 15 years. To give you an idea about myself on a personal level, been married to my wife, Beth, now for 28 years. We've got 2 great kids. Our oldest son, Blake, lives in Houston. He's an aerospace engineer for a NASA subcontractor at Johnson Space Center. So he's working on some really cool stuff right now that will ultimately help with the next manned lunar mission. And my daughter Brooke, she's also very talented. She just graduated from Midwestern State University with a degree in music education. And just this week, in fact, she signed a contract to be a music education teacher at the Granbury ISD. So very proud of my kids and my family, and so that's a pretty good background on myself.
Good. Thanks for sharing that. Walk us through the normal, if there's such a thing, the normal day for a city manager.
Well, it sounds cliche, but it's true. There's really no normal day. I'll come into work and be hit with things that I never imagined I would be faced with. And so I carefully plan out the day the best I can, but that quickly goes out the window. So just to give you an idea, today, for example, I worked on prairie dog issues, pigeon issues, folks angry about prairie dogs getting out at Kiwanis Park. We worked on the COVID-19 situation. Obviously, I received a report from Lou Kreidler, my health department director, about the latest status of that. Worked on our multi-million-dollar budget process, worked some on a huge drainage project that we're going to be doing over the next couple of years. And so I'm not sure what I'll work on after this finishes up, but it's very diverse.
And I'm sure that was the case before March 2020. What's the last 3 months been like for you?
Well, it's really been a whirlwind, as you could imagine. Middle of March, the third week of March, things spun up really quickly. We knew we had to get a handle on the health emergency, but at the same time, we knew we were going to be faced with a financial emergency. So we were working two parallel paths, working the health emergency, doing what was best for the community, but also we were quickly putting plans in place to deal with the fiscal emergency that frankly we're in right now.
What can you tell us in terms of an update on COVID-19 cases?
Well, as of last night, we were at 230 cases, which, as you know, in the last 2 weeks, the number of positive cases have really exploded locally. So far today, another 15 positive cases have come in, and that'll probably grow before the announcement tonight is made as well. I think we've got still about 8 or 9 folks hospitalized.
I got several messages yesterday from people that, I don't know if how this rumor got out, but that the city was about to make masks mandatory in public. And I know that's not the case because I asked several of our officials that, but can you tell me about any conversations related to that?
Well, we did have a conference call actually with the county judge and several other local leaders on Monday afternoon to talk about the COVID-19 situation and what we may need to think about doing if this trend continues. It's important to note, though, that the governor really preempted local governments, cities, counties from making a lot of these decisions. So with respect to masks, for example, we cannot legally mandate that folks wear a mask when they're out in public. The governor not too long ago come out and said that although cities and counties cannot do that, they can force businesses to require masks. So it's a little bit of a legal debate on what he meant by that, because at the same time he says we can't fine people or there's no penalty. So without that, obviously there's no teeth in any ordinance. So but I can tell you at this point, there's no plans to require that even. What we're doing is doubling our efforts to try and educate businesses and the public on the best practices. And they simply are, when you're out, certainly try to maintain social distancing, that 6 feet. And if you can't, even if it's possible, but certainly if you cannot maintain social distancing, wear a mask. Again, the mask is there to protect other people. If you cough or sneeze, remember this COVID-19 spreads very fast through droplets. And so it's that barrier. Now, masks aren't, the end-all be-all, but it's a tool in the toolbox. So that's a big recommendation. The other recommendation that we just simply can't say enough is personal hygiene. Wash those hands. I mean, these hands, the pads of your fingers, carry so many germs, and it's very important to wash your hands as often as possible. And then certainly stay home. Stay home if you can. If you can work from home, do that. Try not to go out in large gatherings and in close proximity. I mean, if we practice those 3 things, I think we can really tamp this down. And unfortunately, I think from about Memorial Day on, folks just kind of tapped out. They just kind of said, look, summer's here. We're tired of sheltering in place. We're going to go back out about our business. And we're unfortunately seeing the result of that in these higher cases.
Tell me somebody you've seen go above and beyond the call of duty since all this started.
Wow, that's a tough question because our team, there's so many great folks on our team that's really pulled together in this time. But if I had to say one person, or perhaps 2, I would say that Lou Kreidler, our health department director, and Amy Fagan, our assistant health director, they've really gone above and beyond. Those ladies have worked tirelessly, 60 plus hour work weeks since this began. And you can imagine the last week or two what their days have looked like when these cases have exploded. So those two folks have just done a tremendous job.
All right, really important question that our audience wants to know about. Have you watched Tiger King?
I did, Henry, and because I knew you were going to ask me that question, so I wanted to watch it.
Did you binge watch it last night?
Actually, I didn't. I watched it several weeks ago, and the reason was because I wanted to find out what all the buzz was about. I knew we had a regional connection to the show with a gentleman that lives up in Burke, and so I did watch it. My wife didn't last very long, though. She, I think, quit watching after maybe the first episode, maybe the first half of the first episode. But, it kind of just pulls you in. I mean, it's kind of like, seeing a car wreck or something. You can't not look. So I did watch it, but some strange things went on up north.
Yeah, something weird timing that came out right as this happened, and we all got shut down in our homes for longer than normal and couldn't go out. And I don't know, maybe it was a plot, but you're right about it being a car wreck. I couldn't stop watching. I didn't really enjoy the end of it, the last episode or two. Maybe the novelty had worn off, but man, those first few episodes, it was just like, oh my God.
Yeah, you had to tune in to see what the next crazy chapter from Joe Exotic was going to look like.
Well, and you also had to watch it just so you'd know what all your friends were talking about on Facebook, because every other post was about it.
Right, and if you ever felt or wondered if you were normal or not, you did just watch that show, and then you quickly realized you were pretty normal, right?
Definitely a self-help show. Makes you feel better about yourself.
Yeah.
COVID-19 notwithstanding, let's go back to your first day on the job as city manager. How are things different today than they were back then?
Wow, a lot of things are different. I mean, obviously from the technological side, it's much different. I mean, we use lots of technology today that we didn't then. For example, the GIS system, geographic information systems, the sophisticated mapping systems that we use, the way that we televise, water and sewer lines to see if they need maintained has really evolved. The other thing that I would say is much different, obviously, is social media, how social media plays into how we communicate with the public and just really do our jobs.
And social media is really interesting these days because whether you're talking about public officials or somebody in my role, it's on the one hand, it's really easy to communicate with your constituents and to be accessible. On the other hand, my gosh, if you have thin skin and you get on Facebook and see the things that people post about me or the mayor or you or whoever, it's tough. And so I'm not sure that's a real improvement or not. We got a question from the audience. This is great. First question from the audience from Julie Williams Coley wants to know, do you think Carol Baskin killed her husband?
Based on what was portrayed in the show and in what I know from that, it leads you to believe that she did. But that's certainly just my opinion.
COVID-19 has certainly had a huge financial impact all the way around, whether you're talking about on people's household budgets or whatever. What do you expect will the fiscal impact be on the city of Wichita Falls?
Well, it came quick and hard in terms of the impact. Our general fund, which, as you know, is our largest fund that pays for things like police services, fire department, street maintenance, park services, planning, a whole host of things. The general fund receives its funding primarily from two sources: property tax, number one source. The second source, which is ever growing, is the sales tax. And so we knew the sales tax was really going to fall off the cliff and take a huge hit, and it has so far. But beyond that, things like our hotel occupancy tax that we use to help fund the Impact Center and our Convention and Visitors Bureau, has taken a huge hit. Interest earnings at the same time. A year ago, we were earning about 2% on our idle funds, which is multi-million dollars for the city. And we're down to a little over, a tenth of a percent. So we're losing hundreds of thousands of dollars from last year just on interest earnings. The alcoholic beverage tax is way down. So, all those things come together to make this perfect storm. And at the same time, we had to spend a lot of overtime responding to the COVID emergency and things like that. So we're just still, in the beginning stages of what I earlier termed as the fiscal emergency. But we knew that. We knew we were going to have that. So we took quick and decisive action early on to put a moratorium on unnecessary spending, non-emergency spending. We put hiring freezes in place, a whole host of things. And that has saved us a few $1 million, honestly. And then we're, in the midst right now of formulating our 2020-21 fiscal year budget, which starts October 1st. And we really had to tighten our belts and make lots of cuts to that budget as well. So the good news is that we've been very frugal and good managers of our funds. And so we had a healthy reserve fund, that rainy day fund, if you will, for things like a tornado or a large legal settlement or something like this. And so we were able to lean on that somewhat. And we're really in a lot better shape than many communities around the state because of that.
For those of you who just joined us, you're watching The Pulse, brought to you by United Regional Healthcare System. My guest today is Wichita Falls City Manager Darron Leiker. Darron, we've got a situation in Wichita Falls where every 2 years you've got city councilors running for re-election. And so every year they're staggered. So every year you've got new seats coming open. You've got a mayor running for office every 2 years. And you work for them, right? How do you help, and how does the city help city councilors and a mayor get settled into their roles? Because they obviously don't know everything about city operations and governance from day one.
Right. Well, for a little background, we have what's called a mayor council form of government, or manager council form of government, rather. That's where the mayor and council hires a city manager to run the day-to-day operations of the city. And it's really, when people ask me what a city manager does, I use the analogy of a private company. Because people can identify with that. So a private company has a board of directors, right? That would be analogous to my city council. Board of directors will have a chairman of the board. That would be similar to our mayor's position. And the board of directors will hire a CEO or a chief administrative officer to run the day-to-day operations. And that's what the city manager position is. So as you alluded to, my bosses, I've got 7 bosses, and they change hands as frequently as every 2 years. And it poses a couple of different challenges. One, the continuity of the organization. If you've got a strategic plan that you've been working on, you really have to make course corrections if you get new folks with different ideas come on board. And that's one of the most difficult things about being a city manager, is adapting to new council, new mayors. And I've seen a lot of good city managers across the state, across the country, that they don't last very long. They last a couple of years because they don't want to change, they don't want to evolve. So they'll get new council members that will want to do different things or think in a different way, and they will dig in, the city managers, and say, well, I'll outlast you, you're temporary, I'm not. And they'll quickly realize that, we are staff, we work for the city council, it's their prerogative. So I work really hard on that. And to your question about how we prepare new council members, once a person files to run for mayor or council member, I immediately send them a letter inviting them to come in and sit down with me and talk about any city issues that we're currently working on, to answer any questions they have about the organization. Because I know those folks will go out, and then during the campaign they'll speak to civic clubs and the League of Women Voters and I want them to have some information, some background about the city and what we're doing. And then after the election, I immediately reach out to the winners, and we schedule a new council member orientation session. And it's pretty exhaustive. You can ask some of the council members that go through that. It's a total immersion into the organization, where we put them in front of every department head for a couple of hours at each session to talk through their jobs, what they do. We give tours of the different city facilities and so forth. And that really helps. That takes quite a bit of time, honestly, a couple of weeks. But it pays dividends, because those council members quickly get immersed into the organization and can hit the ground running.
Who's your favorite city councilor? I'm just kidding. I'm not going to ask you that.
Who my favorite child is, right?
Yeah, exactly. I got a question on our Facebook page from Colin Stevens, and I don't know if you know the answer to this yet, but what are some of the main things to be cut in next year's budget?
Well, I have not submitted my budget to City Council yet. My preliminary budget will be due in about 3 weeks to them. So I don't want to show my cards too much, because I don't want to get out ahead of them. But all that to say, we have cut just about every department, certainly in the general fund. We've really tightened our belts, because the last thing we wanted to do during this COVID-19 emergency is have to increase taxes. So at the same time we're seeing our revenues really fall off, we understand that we have to do our part, and we can't pass on a tax increase to the public right now. That's simply not palatable. So that meant we had to really take a hard look at our operations and cut back where necessary. I will tell you this, that there will not be any pay raises in my budget recommendation to City Council. We'll cut things like travel and training and those discretionary accounts that we can, so that we'll submit a budget that'll be probably $3 to $5 million less than the one we're in right now.
Can you point to one day on the job in this position that was your best day ever in this job?
Well, I want to say that it was the day I was hired, the day the council took the chance on a 35-year-old guy that, to lead this organization of 1,200 employees. And, currently we're at $190 million budget. So, it's like running a big corporation, if you will. We're a big business. So obviously that was the day I celebrated. I believe it was September 6th of 2005, to be exact. Beyond that, I really celebrate. I don't know if it was one day. It was over the course of days when the drought broke in May of 2015. In fact, I can remember, laying in bed one night, and I lost lots of sleep during that new drought of record we went through. But I remember in particular laying in bed one night when these storms were just rolling in, and looking at my radar and seeing the massive thunderstorms that were just parked over our watershed. We always tell people that it really doesn't matter if it rains over Wichita Falls. It needs to rain over our watershed, southwest of here, to get into Lake Arrowhead and Kickapoo and Kemp. And those storms were just parked there. They were not moving. They were just dumping an enormous amount of rain. So I just, I really celebrated that.
And to your credit, I remember you telling me and others several times that we weren't going to gradually get out of the drought. It was going to take a massive event like that.
Right.
And it was pretty cool. My family and I moved here at the end of 2013. And so we had never seen water in Lake Wichita except way out there in the middle. And I remember that Sunday after it rained and kept raining that we went out to the lake and and it was just spectacular. There were waves coming in, and there were mosquitoes that had already hatched, and it was like you expect a normal lake to be. And there must have been 200 people out there just taking pictures and video, and you could feel the relief. It was pretty special.
Yeah, it was a spectacle. I mean, I remember driving out to the spillway at Lake Wichita, and there were just people out there watching and taking pictures and video and just celebrating seeing that water go over the spillway. Because, I mean, that was probably one of the toughest things I've had to work through in my career, was that drought. That was a new drought of record. And what that means is that going back as far as weather records went back 106 years, I believe, that was the worst drought Wichita Falls had ever experienced. And we were very close to running out of water. And there weren't a lot of good options. I mean, we were cloud seeding, and we were applying barrier chemicals over the lakes to try to just slightly reduce the evaporative factor and different things. We put together was the largest direct potable reuse project in the country really quickly. In fact, we didn't even bury the pipes. We laid them on top of Holiday Creek to recycle our water. So the community, there was a lot of praying going on. In fact, you still see, the pray for rain signs around town in places, but the community lived through quite a bit and celebrated that.
Is there one city department that occupies more of your time than the others?
Obviously, right now, I would say it's probably a tie between the health department because of the COVID-19 emergency and the finance department because we're in the throes of the budget process. One of the chief responsibilities that I have per the city charter is to draft the preliminary budget. And so we're really working hard every day on that. So that right now it's those two departments.
What's your favorite movie?
Oh gosh, I have a lot of good movies. I watched an old movie a while back that was really a classic. A River Runs Through It. Brad Pitt. That movie, don't you? Where they fly fish in Montana, I think. That was a great movie. And I always have to watch Shawshank Redemption when I'm flipping through the channels and I see it on. So those are a couple that come to mind that are always classic.
Yeah, my friends know that Shawshank is one of my favorites, and I think it's something my dad instilled in me. That quote that Andy tells Red about "get busy living, get busy dying." The whole premise is just hope is a good thing, and that's the way I've always lived. It's like I'm not going to dwell on the stress from yesterday because it's gone, and I can choose to deal with it or I can choose to move on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, for those of you watching at home on Fox 18, we want to say thanks for watching The Pulse, sponsored by United Regional Healthcare Center. For the live stream audience, stick around. We'll be right back. And to everyone watching on Fox, you can visit the Chamber's Facebook page to watch the show in its entirety. So thanks again for Texas Homeless Fox for airing The Pulse, and to Darron Leiker, City Manager, for joining us. We'll see you next time. And we're back. Darron, when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
As I recall, I wanted to be a police officer. In fact, in high school, that was a career, aspiration. And my undergraduate degree is criminal justice, and I wanted to go in the FBI. And so my plan was to go to law school because most FBI agents are lawyers or accountants. So it was my probably junior year of undergraduate school that I took a public administration class, and it was over city management, and I had an opportunity to do an internship with the city of Topeka, Kansas, and I kind of fell in love with that. But as a kid, I think a police officer was what I wanted to be when I grew up.
Go back to the 18-year-old Darron Leiker. If there was something you could tell him, what would it be?
Well, I would probably tell him to invest in a small company from Cupertino, California, called Apple, and then a little bit later, perhaps invest in Amazon or something like that. But no, I would go back, and I would tell him that you can be anything. I mean, the future is in your hands if you work hard and you treat people right.
Is there another community that you follow that really does things in a positive way that you could point to?
Yeah, in the world of city management, it's a close-knit group, and so I've got friends and obviously managers in Texas, but all over the country, and there's communities that obviously I watch close that seem to be doing things really well. In Texas, you've got cities like Sugar Land and further north, Plano and Frisco and places like that. But there's a lot of well-run cities around the state, certainly.
What do you like the most about your job?
Well, what I love most about my job is that, and we talked about it early on, is that no 2 days are alike. I get to work on some really cool things. I get to build, multi-million-dollar travel centers and new airport facilities and rebuild general aviation airports. So I like the fact that, I can work on something from the very early stage, from the concept or planning stage, and see that actually built out and actually get to cut the ribbon, on projects like that. Something else I would probably say is, Sheppard Air Force Base. I love having Sheppard in our backyard because we work so closely with the folks at Sheppard that, when I look around at my colleagues in other cities that don't have that opportunity, it makes me appreciate that. And probably lastly, I would just say that I'm fortunate to have, great staff and a great mayor and council to work for. So that really makes me appreciate the job.
I think you said 1,200 employees, $190 million budget. How do you handle stress?
Well, it's an interesting question. Stress is probably what burns out city managers the quickest, and the ones that have staying power, the ones that do well, are the ones that evolve, like I mentioned earlier, with new employees and new challenges and new council members, but also the ones who can manage that stress. I mean, we all have stress, right? It's how you manage that stress. And for me, my number one way that I manage stress is through exercise. I'm kind of a fitness nut. I work out, 6 days a week usually. I'm on the elliptical for 50 minutes to an hour, and then I try and lift weights 3 times a week. So that for me is a great way to manage stress. And then the other way I can manage stress, I think, I've got a good handle on what I would call a work-life balance. So when I go home, even after a very stressful day, I try to leave work at work and compartmentalize. I'm really good at compartmentalizing things because I work on so many different things at once. I have to master that, but I'm good at putting those in, the compartment until, later that evening when I can work on it, or the next morning. And that's kind of the recipe, I think, for how I can manage stress.
And I bet a big part of that is that you don't even have a Facebook account. That's
right. I mean, and consciously I don't. I mean, obviously we've got, the city has a major social media presence. We reach 60-some thousand people a week on our platforms, and so I'm part of that, obviously, in my job. But I purposefully don't have a Twitter or Facebook account because I know that if I got pulled into that, it would turn into work and conflict with folks that might be upset about something with the city. So I've kept at arm's length on that. My wife has Facebook, and so I'm on there with her, keeping up with family and friends and such.
Oh, people don't argue on Facebook. The mayor and I never get into vigorous debates with people.
And it's difficult to read some of the stuff that's posted, and frustrating to me when I know the facts are different, and I get frustrated when people don't seek those facts out. But unfortunately, it's the world we live in today. We're very divisive. People have essentially picked their camps, and they're entrenched, one side or the other, and with a lot of the news outlets that cater to whatever you believe, it kind of becomes incestuous, and that's gotten worse, certainly in my time, in my career, that the divisiveness, I think, is a lot worse than it was. But social media can be a great thing, a great tool, but like any technology, it has its pros and cons.
Yeah, I love it. I just have to remember what it's good for me to use it for. It's so interesting nowadays. There's so many people that have tons of ideas, but very few questions.
Right.
That's a problem.
Yeah, and what you have to also keep in perspective when you read a negative comment, we're a city of 106,000 people. And so when a handful of people complain about something, it can pull you down. It can really ruin your day. But I try not to let that shift my focus, because if it does, that's not fair to the rest of the community, the rest of the taxpayers, if you will, who expect us to continue doing the job that they need. So it's important to keep it in perspective that, you hear, it's easy for the vocal minority now to go out on Facebook or social media and pile on, because you don't hear from a lot of the positive side. Certainly in this business you don't. But I talk to the mayor a lot about that, and he's, as very active on social media, and God bless him. I don't know how he does it. He reads some negative stuff about him, and he's out there trying to do the best job that he can, and he does a great job. But I'll often just tell him, put it in perspective. Remember that this is a large city, and you work for a lot of people.
Let's talk about one of those day-ruining topics that's reared its head lately, and that's the idea of memorials and monuments staying up, coming down. I know that the city hasn't necessarily taken any action one way or another on that, but can you tell us, are there conversations being had at the city level, and where are we at?
Well, obviously, the issue has come to a head, and we're dealing with it and having dialogue. But I would tell you that whether to keep the Confederate monument or to remove it is not my decision, not a staff decision. Ultimately would be a decision made by the mayor and city council, and there are no plans that I'm aware of to have the monument removed. But I think that it's important, it's healthy to have that dialogue, because we continue to evolve. But that we get complaints from folks, but we also get a lot of folks that tell us don't remove it. So it's kind of even right now, if I had to guess, of who has come forward and asked us to remove the monument, and those that have asked us to keep it. So it's not an easy decision, should the mayor and council have to make that.
You've been actively involved in our economic development efforts since way before I got to Wichita Falls. What do you think we can do as a community to make our area more business friendly?
Well, I think I'll talk from a city government standpoint. Something that we continually strive to improve on is how we work with those businesses, how we work with folks that want to expand that are already here, or new businesses that want to move to town. It's critically important that we're not an obstacle, that we're a way to help them succeed, whether that's, again, a building expansion or someone moving into town and building a new building, and we have to inspect it and work with them closely on that. So we're redoubling our efforts to try to become more helpful, more friendly, and not just an obstacle. I mean, there are codes, especially life safety codes where, the rule is the rule. If you need a fire suppression system in a hotel, that's the rule, and that rule is there for safety. We're not going to come off of that, but when there are areas that we can work with the business and bend in their favor, if there's a gray area that doesn't involve life safety, we're going to want to bend in favor of that business for a couple of reasons. One, it's the right thing to do, and secondly, we want that business to come to Wichita Falls and succeed. We want to grow the economy. We want to expand. So those are some things the city can do. We've taken some steps this year, and we're meeting at least on a quarterly basis with the development community, the architects, the engineers in the community, to have an open dialogue about what we can do as a city to help, to improve, to knock down some of those barriers. And that's been very helpful. We've gotten some good suggestions and feedback that we've implemented. And one of the other things we've done, and it was an outcrop of those meetings, frankly, was improved our technology in the building inspection and code enforcement area, where we can accept electronic plans, for example, so people don't have to take as much time off work and come in and bring an expensive paper plan. We can do that electronically. We can have our folks using their iPads out in the field more now, doing inspections. So those are just some examples of things that we're doing, but we can always do better.
One of the challenges I've heard from people in private enterprises is quite often there may be one inspector makes a ruling here, and then 3 months down the road or however long, another inspector comes in and gives a different direction. Is that something you guys talk about as a department, and how do we get past that?
Yeah, we talk about it all the time, and frankly, that's one of my pet peeves. The last thing we need to do is if you're whether you're a home builder or an architect, if you call for an inspection and we send one inspector out and they say, okay, you have to fix these two things, and then you fix those two things and you ask for the follow-up inspection, and we send a different inspector out. We don't want that inspector, unless, again, it's a life safety, critical matter. We don't want that second inspector to come up with his or her own list. It's not fair to the business. So we really watch that close to make sure that doesn't happen. We tell the folks, our folks, you get one bite at that apple, and it's not fair to the business to keep changing, the goal line, so to speak. So that's important. The other thing that we do that helps a lot, and particularly with large projects, is we've offered now to have what's called pre-development meetings with folks. They're free at their convenience. We'll bring our development team in and sit down before they start the project to answer questions, to talk through any thorny issues that they may have, any questions that they have. And 9 times out of 10, it boils down to communication with people. And if you can do that at the front end, it really makes these projects go by so much smoother.
You are watching The Pulse, brought to you by United Regional Healthcare System. My guest today is Wichita Falls City Manager Darron Leiker. Darron, what is the craziest and or funniest thing that you've seen happen at a city council meeting?
Oh boy, good question. I've had a lot of city council meetings over my years. I probably shouldn't. I'm thinking of one thing that was funny, but I probably shouldn't say it. It might get myself in trouble. So I won't say it. But by and large, I mean, our council meetings are, ran like, a business meeting. They don't get crazy. They don't get out of hand like you see some of the council meetings in Austin that go all night long, and you get, all these protesters that show up naked or something like that to the council meeting. Ours are pretty tame.
I'm from Louisiana. I've seen all kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
When I was in Lafayette, we had a counselor carve his name on the dais while he was sitting up there, not intentionally not listening to the mayor that was talking about an issue they were about to vote on. It was interesting.
Yeah.
Are you guys using any technologies that you were not using before COVID-19 hit?
Yeah, we are. And in fact, one thing that comes to mind is, the video teleconferencing, whether it's Zoom or the Google Meets platform. We've done a lot of that. So we've had a lot of meetings via video, and it's worked out well. We've also, had folks work from home and introduce some new technology where they can, get right into the city networks to continue their work. So those are just a couple of examples where I think we've, learned a great deal, and we'll probably carry some of those lessons forward even after COVID-19 is finished with us.
What kind of student were you?
I was a good student. I mean, I was a smart kid. I made good grades. I had to work my way through college, and I paid for I'm proud to say I paid for my college. So I had a part-time job. My first job was probably when I was 14 years old, working on farms in rural Kansas, whether it was driving a wheat truck, driving a tractor, disking fields, a lot of that kind of stuff. And, I worked as a cook, meat cutter in steakhouses, security guards, and that kind of thing through college.
My first job was in the kitchen at McDonald's, and my first day they told me to be there at 5:45. I assumed that meant PM. And so 6 o'clock comes around, my first day of work in my entire life, and I'm not there. I was still asleep. It was amazing. What's your favorite?
Back to grades. I mean, as an undergraduate, I had scholarships, academic scholarships, and I was actually really fortunate because the graduate school I wanted to go to offered me a graduate assistantship. So I was able to do research and help teach some undergraduate courses. And basically, I went to grad school for free. They paid me a stipend, so I actually made a little bit of money. So that worked out pretty well.
Nice. Who's your favorite band, and what's your favorite song of theirs?
Well, I'm a teenager from the '80s, so I grew up listening to hair bands. Motley Crue, Ozzy Osbourne. In fact, I went to an Ozzy Osbourne concert. I believe it was '86 or '87, something like that. So I listened to that kind of music, and that's still kind of carried forward now. I listen to my satellite radios either tuned to the '80s music or classic rock or the Ozzy channel or Hair Nation.
So what Ozzy song is your favorite?
I liked a lot of his early stuff, Ultimate Sinner album, those kind of things. But if you look at my Apple Music album now that I listen to, it's pretty diverse. I like about everything except hip hop and rap.
Motley Crue, Home Sweet Home.
Yeah, great song.
What do you
the documentary, I think that was on Netflix.
Yeah,
about Motley Crue. Enjoyed watching that.
Yeah, the book's great. The book's better if you ever get a chance to read it.
I haven't read the book.
Much more realistic and in depth. What do you love the most about Wichita Falls?
Well, personally, I mean, I raised my family here. When we moved here in 2002, my kids were little. And so it's a great place to raise a family. And then professionally, I would call Wichita Falls kind of that sweet spot to be a city manager in terms of population and responsibility. I mean, we're not like a metroplex city where we don't run the water system and the wastewater treatment system and police dispatch. A lot of those cities contract with the county and other larger cities. We're a full service regional city, regional trade center. So, we run things across the board that many cities don't handle, whether it's a health department, whether it's a multi-purpose event center, airports, and the like. And then our population is a good number. We're not too large. We're not too small. We're kind of a good fit. And then geographically, we're in a good location. Texas is a great place to live. It's a great place to be a city manager. And, we're close to, a metropolitan area if we need that, and services that we can't find here. So those are things that I really like about Wichita Falls. And part of the reason it's a great place to raise a family too is I think we have genuine good people here that look out for each other. Really good people.
You are correct. We were talking to some business visitors we had in town today, and that whole idea of quality of life came up, and yeah, for us, it's that big little city or little big city or whatever you want to call it. I think 100,000 people is a good size to offer what our citizens need. And then you add in a couple of things. So you got this international flair because of Sheppard Air Force Base and our manufacturing community. And then you add in the fact that there's no traffic anywhere. And then you add in the fact we were just named the lowest cost of living city in the entire country.
Right.
And so those things together tell a pretty good story.
Yeah. We've got Midwestern State University, really a gem for us. I wish more people would realize how lucky we are to have MSU. I mean, I mentioned earlier, my daughter is a product of MSU. It's a great school, so we're fortunate to have it.
No doubt. And the international flavor for this community, it comes from that large group of international students. It's just awesome.
Right.
Do you cook?
I do. I like to cook. I alluded to earlier that one of my first jobs as a teenager was a cook in a steakhouse, and then I transitioned to a meat cutter. So I was cutting the steaks in those steakhouses. So obviously I like to grill. I've got an outdoor kitchen at my house, and so I have a smoker, a Kamado style ceramic smoker that I like to use, as well as the grill. So steaks, all kinds of barbecue. I like to go out on the weekends and fire up the grill and the griddle and cook pancakes, eggs, bacon, and that sort of thing.
Glenn Barham is watching, and he says Creedence Clearwater Revival best ever.
Yeah,
but he's old.
That was a little earlier than my time, but they're a great group.
Yeah, Creedence was good. They're one of those bands that it's kind of like the Beatles. You start listening to them, and you didn't realize how many of their songs you actually knew.
Exactly, yeah.
When you run into a problem or an issue that you just can't figure out, who do you go to?
Well, city manager world can be pretty lonely at times because you have, when people come in and they want to meet with me or they have an issue, it's usually a pretty hairy issue. I mean, it's usually something that they, it's a pretty major deal. And so, if I can't help resolve that issue, I reach out to my colleagues, my peers around the state, around the country. They're great, about helping. We're great about helping each other and talking about how we've had similar examples and how we've worked through those issues.
We talked about Tiger King a little bit earlier. Now that you're past that mess, you guys been binge watching anything else?
Well, yeah, I don't know if I would call it binge watching, but we try to watch an episode or two in the evening of a show called Yellowstone. Have you ever seen that?
No, but is that Kevin Costner?
It's Kevin Costner. He plays the patriarch. It's about this huge Montana ranch just outside the park, the Yellowstone Park, and it's very good. It just pulls you in. So I think there's 4 seasons now, 3 or 4 seasons, and we're still making our way through, I think, the end of season 2. But it's what I would categorize as maybe a combination, a cross between The Sopranos and Gunsmoke, because it's kind of ruthless. It's a gritty show, but I'd say it's probably one of Kevin Costner's best acting pieces.
I've never seen an actor that can do so well at that gruff cowboy type character, but at the same time, he's been in 6 or 7 amazing sports movies, playing baseball players, pro golfer,
right.
A long distance cyclist, some crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's no crystal ball, but what do you think the next couple of months look like for Wichita Falls?
Well, I think the next couple of months are critical. I'm talking about from the COVID-19 side. I think that, we're seeing a real uptick in the number of cases, and I'm worried, frankly, about that. All along, we've said, we had to flatten the curve, and we did. We did that. We did very well, and now we're seeing the cases just kind of explode. And my fear is that, if it gets to the vulnerable population, the elderly, the ones that have compromised health systems, a lot of those folks are going to have to be hospitalized. I think at last count, we had 8 or 9 in the hospital now. I just worry that we'll overwhelm our healthcare system. So we need to do everything we can to try to avoid that. So, I'm not sure what this winter will look like either. But, this trend that we're seeing the last few weeks can't continue. So hopefully we can reverse that. And then hopefully when school starts, we don't see a surge of cases in the schools. I know Mike Kurt, and his school board, they're working very hard to figure out how and what this school year will look like and how to manage through that. So we're gonna have to watch that very carefully. From my standpoint, professional standpoint as well, we've got a tough budget to get approved here in the next few months, and a lot of work to continue in that regard.
Where are we at in terms of big events?
At Impact, you mean?
Well, allowing any type of event, whether Impact or some other organization at some other place.
Right. We're still kind of at the mercy of the governor of Texas, his order. And, we can't have large gatherings of 500 people or more. And so obviously concerts and things like that, we're not ready. We're not able to host those yet. So, I mentioned budget cuts earlier. The department city function that's probably taken the biggest hit is the multipurpose event center. I mentioned at council the other day that Impact has been is still between a vice. On the one side, they're being squeezed by the hotel occupancy taxes being half of what they were a year ago. On the other side, they can't open their doors and generate any new revenue. So it's been very tough on Impact. And so we've had lots of staff furloughs and some layoffs, and we've done everything we can to minimize costs. And, hopefully we can start hosting some events. Probably won't be until this fall at the earliest, I would guess.
What advice would you have for a brand new public administrator?
Oh, good question. Well, first of all, I would thank them for having the goal, for wanting to go into public administration, hopefully city management. I mean, it's a good career, but there aren't many. The pipeline is really slowed down. So in government, across the board, a lot of younger people are not choosing to go into it. A lot of reasons why you could speculate. It's because of the climate today that we live in, with the negativity and everything. But if I had a person that was young and interested in it, I would do my best to encourage them to go into the business. If you want to be a city manager of a large community anyway, you really need a master's degree. So there's a set track that you go to kind of get that city management training. So obviously they would need to do that. And then along the way, I would tell them, pick up some mentors along the way. They're invaluable. I had mentors that helped me throughout the career. And so those are just a few things I would tell them.
I'm glad you didn't say, good God, stay away.
No, I wouldn't say that.
So we've got about a minute left. Is there any message you want to share with the citizens of Wichita Falls?
Sure. I would say a couple of things. Again, on the COVID-19 situation, because that's kind of first and front here. Thank you for what you've done up to this point. Comparatively, we still are in a lot better shape than our peer cities. whether it's Abilene or Amarillo or Longview or Tyler. Although our cases are really taking off, cumulatively, we're still not in bad shape. We've not, seen lots of hospitalizations to overwhelm the system. So I want to thank everybody for doing their part. We just ask that you continue to try to wear a mask, wash your hands, work from home if possible, and just do your part. We're all in this together.
All right, well, that's it for today's edition of The Pulse. Thanks to my guest, Darron Leiker, and to our sponsor, United Regional Healthcare System. This show can be found on the Chamber's Facebook page in its entirety, also at Texoma's homepage and on KJTL Texoma's Fox this Sunday. Join us next time on The Pulse. I'll see you then.